Ninth day, upper wind month, 1 CE, 0300 hours. A gust of cool night wind lifted the torn silk curtains, carrying with it the stench of char and the sounds of a city forlorn. The screams were the worst. No matter how hungry, no matter how weak, they somehow always found it in them to scream. Soft, yet piercing, their wordless cries of desperation, terror and anguish filtered through the broken balcony window, echoing throughout the throne room as if to cast their damnation upon its sole occupant. Our queen. We trusted you. We loved you. Our blood is on your hands. A whimper rose from a polished marble throne. Eyes raw from sleepless nights filled with bitter weeping, Draudil and Auriculus stared listlessly over the high hall of the Draconic Kingdom. Once filled with courtiers and servants, only dust and refuse remained. Magical torchlight glistened off of the dusty stone floors, broken window shards and empty bottles strewn about. But for the bottles, it was a scene unchanged over the past few weeks. Despite their best efforts, or because of their best efforts, the Beastman nation making their slow advance across the Draconic Kingdom accelerated their cruel campaign of wanton slaughter. Her eyes fell over the bits of broken glass haphazardly swept away from the base of her throne. It seemed like a good idea at the time. With their military forces hopelessly outmatched by the Beastmen, the Draconic Kingdom mostly relied on adventurers and foreign aid to repel raids and invasions. Every time their neighbors' aggression rose, the nation that the Draconic Kingdom sent donations to, the slain theocracy, would send their forces to stem the ravenous tide and push it back. The Draconic Kingdom made financial contributions on a regular schedule under the premise that their security was assured by their powerful neighbor to the west. Outsiders labeled the arrangement as imprudent and foolish, that they should instead allocate the not insubstantial portion of their national budget to their own military, but it was not so simple as that. One could not simply enact a bill into law, throw money at the citizens and expect an army to spring forth. Raising an army took time. Raising an effective army took an even longer time. It required education, training, industry and infrastructure. Doing so was decidedly difficult when Beastmen raided them on a regular basis and the Draconic Kingdom's soldiers were simply seen as slightly more interesting food. They could throw money at the problem until they went bankrupt to no avail. And, so, they instead depended on the forces of a country that was stable and secure enough to actually resist the predation of their demi-human neighbors. The slain theocracy was the most powerful of humanity's nations, one with 6 centuries of stability and the development that came with it. Their forces had few issues turning the Beastmen away. Except, this time, they didn't come. Draudil couldn't understand why. Generally speaking, they were quite prompt when it came to heading off demi-human incursions. Dealing with threats to humanity was an integral part of their mandate, after all. Despite its name, the Draconic Kingdom was a human nation and the theocracy had donned the mantle of humanity's defenders. But since the sovereign of the Draconic Kingdom was technically a Dragonlord, the theocracy aided them unofficially to avoid internal unrest. How they went about helping mattered little to Draudil and her people, however. What mattered was that they did, and in doing so saved them time and time again. Usually, they sent over an army group and a contingent of paladins. She understood that the theocracy was at war with the elves, but, even if their regular forces were tied up, they could have teleported over one of their scriptures, elite forces composed of some of the theocracy's most powerful individuals. Instead, when the tribes of the Beastman nation crossed the border once again, Draudil's call for aid was met with silence. Her armies, which had been painstakingly trained to hold out until help came, sacrificed their lives in vain. At that point, all that was left for her subjects to do was hole up in their towns and cities while the Beastmen sated themselves by ravaging the countryside. Additionally, a new problem had become apparent in the most recent conflict. Unlike their previous raids and invasions, the Beastmen now appeared intent on staying. She wasn't sure if it was because they became emboldened by the weak resistance that they had encountered or if the Beastman nation had changed its foreign policy, but more and more of its tribes invaded. The magnitude of their most recent invasion was far greater than ever before. They swept over the land, devouring villages and laying siege to the towns and cities in their path. With no response from the theocracy, Draudil turned to adventurers for help. But adventurers, while effective against raids, could only do so much against a conquest. No matter how strong they were, they did not have the projection and coverage of an army. Where they fought, the Draconic Kingdom held. Everywhere else, well, Needless to say, it was unpleasant choosing when and where her people would be abandoned to their fates. Province by province, the Draconic Kingdom fell. As the situation became more and more untenable, they came up with a desperate ploy, a surgical strike that would eliminate the leadership of the Beastmen forces. The idea was that, without the Lord that unified them, their war effort would fragment and dissipate. She twisted her lip in disgust. It was a plan just as barbaric as its namesake, the surgery proposed by the boastful sage of the Minotaur nation. Judging by their reaction, the Beastmen thought so as well. The surgical strike was a success, killing the Beastman Lord directing the invasion as well as many of his followers. The adventurers returned to great fanfare and a feast was prepared to celebrate their success. It was during that celebration that retaliation fell upon them. Even as she was toasting Crystal Tear and the adventurers who had participated in their heroic raid, a group of powerful beastmen who had infiltrated the capital broke in through the throne room's balcony windows. The adventurers and many of her courtiers were butchered before her eyes. Draudilin thought she would be next, but the beastmen only sneered at her. They had simply come to exact vengeance. It was achieved so easily that she had no doubt in her mind that they could have assassinated her at any point of their invasion. The demi-humans vanished into the night, leaving her with her dismembered hopes scattered around the throne room. Assumptions that the invasion would lose cohesion and fall apart proved tragically correct. They were correct in the idea that their foes would lose cohesion and fall apart, but the pieces fell all over the Draconic Kingdom. The Beastman army fragmented into hundreds of tribes and went wherever they pleased. Their orderly advance turned into a chaotic deluge that devoured everything in its path. As the Beastmen slaughtered their way across her country, all hope was lost. Before they could lay siege to the capital and occupy the coast, Draudilin sent her people away. She ordered what was left of her court to leave and implored her people to do the same. But they wouldn't. The more she pleaded with them to flee and save their families, the more they clung to her and dug in their heels. She was their beloved queen, how could they possibly abandon her? And so the Beastmen came. And so her people died. And so Draudilin Auriculus could only weep as she waited for the end. It felt that waiting was half of her life. She waited for help whenever the Beastmen attacked. She waited for others to achieve results. Perhaps that was unfair as all leaders, no matter their talent or resources, had to wait for development, growth and revenues. She had one resource that most others did not, however. Many often wondered why a human country was called the Draconic Kingdom and why Draudilin Auriculus held the title of Black-Scale Dragon Lord. The answer to the first question was probably a bit fanciful. Draudilin's great-grandfather was an actual dragon, the Brightness Dragon Lord. Founded in the aftermath of the demon god's rampage, the Draconic Kingdom was a nation centered around the fact that its royalty was of draconic lineage. Although Draudilin was pretty much human, there were a few things about her that were decidedly not. One of those things was that she could wield exotic magic, which qualified her as a dragon lord in draconic culture. She never really took pride in the title, but her subjects seemed to. This felt like it caused more problems than it solved. On a personal level, it put her on a strange sort of pedestal. Nobility was already seen as attractive and royalty even more so. She was a queen with an exotic bloodline and this drew all manner of interested parties, who were for the most part annoying. It was loosely something that any eligible ruler or aristocrat had to deal with, so it couldn't be helped. The big problem was how it affected their diplomatic efforts. The Draconic Kingdom's most attractive prospective ally, the slain theocracy, followed a faith that advocated human-centric policies and culture. Though the Draconic Kingdom was a nation populated by humans, their head of state was technically a dragon lord. As such, the people of the slain theocracy treated the Draconic Kingdom as a non-human state and nothing official could happen between them. There was no trade from their merchants, no exchange of culture, magic, technology or knowledge. The military support that the Draconic Kingdom received was not recognized by the theocracy's general population. She wasn't sure how the soldiers and agents who came back from the fighting reported it. Perhaps they just treated it as a deployment against demi-humans and it just so happened to be in the Draconic Kingdom. Therefore, the Draconic Kingdom was in a difficult position. They had powerful beastman neighbors to the east, the Katsa Plains to the north and the Inland Sea to the west and south. Being founded on a fertile coastal plain with riverlands ideal for human habitation in their situation only meant that the Draconic Kingdom was a prime location for beastmen to hunt human populations like wild game. There was one thing that they had, no, she had, that could have stopped the beastmen. This was the primal sorcery that made her a dragon lord, wild magic. It was stupid, in hindsight. The lineage that prevented the Draconic Kingdom from officially joining hands with the slain theocracy offered the power by which the Draconic Kingdom could be free from that very same dependency, yet she refused to employ it. Her great-grandfather taught her that dragons had a special place in the world. It had little to do with mortal concepts of good and evil. They were keepers, those who were entrusted with power by the world to maintain its natural order and defend it from existential threats. It was something like a sacred purpose, one instilled into every dragon lord from before the time of the 8 Greed Kings. To mortals, the dragon lords of old might have seemed aloof, capricious, tyrannical or outright evil, but the truth was that everything they did was in service to a greater cause, maintaining the sanctity of the world itself. They were the last and often sole line of defense against threats that only a select few were aware of, maintaining a thankless vigil that spanned eons. And then, someone fucked up. Well, her great-grandfather didn't quite put it in those exact terms, but that's what basically happened. The dragons of present day carried a vestige of this legacy in the form of their instincts. They were still physically strong enough to manage their domains, but they had lost the ability to wield wild magic. Her great-grandfather greatly lamented this fact, exploring the possibility of introducing new wild magic users by fathering children with the different races of the world. Draudilin was a success in that sense, but she lacked the power of a dragon despite being descended from one of the mightiest dragon lords. Despite this, her great-grandfather took the time to make sure that she understood the basics of wielding wild magic before leaving her to fend for herself as dragons often did with their offspring. He was a dragon that cared too much, by draconic standards. Dragons were akin to sorcerers, or rather, sorcerers were akin to dragons. They would eventually figure out their sorcery on their own. Still, while Draudilin was thankful for her great-grandfather's care, she had foolishly disregarded one of his most important lessons. Though she was only part dragon, the Draconic Kingdom was still her draconic domain. It was her responsibility to take care of it, to make sure her little part of the world was managed properly. No matter the cost. It was this cost that made her hesitate, kept her from doing what needed to be done. The Brightness Dragon Lord had even warned her that her human nature would get in the way. With the power of wild magic, she could destroy any invasion. The cost, however, was the sacrifice of many of her people. Unlike tear magic, which used mana, wild magic was fueled by the primal power of the soul. She could turn armies of millions into ash, but her people would perish in return. As such, she considered its use a last resort. And so, she waited. Waited for the beastmen to grow disinterested in their offensive, waited for the adventurers to produce strategically significant results, waited for help to arrive from the theocracy. As she waited, the beastmen continued their advance. The last resort became a last resort. Then a last resort. Villages, towns and cities fell. The subjects that she was loath to sacrifice to destroy the beastman invaders were instead consumed by them. Her great-grandfather was right. Her domain was her responsibility. She should have defended it, even if the cost was the death of her people and her own damnation. By displaying the undeniable power of wild magic, the tragedy that has unfolded could have been prevented. A threat was only effective if one demonstrated the will to carry it out, after all. Draudilin reached for a bottle at the foot of her throne. Finding it empty, she reached out for the next. She sent the fourth empty bottle hurtling through the air to smash into a nearby column. Regret truly was all that she had left. Bestial roars sounded through the throne room door. Cold dread trickled through her. They were here. Something thudded against the door, followed by a scraping noise, the sound of claws being drawn over sturdy, enchanted oak. A tear trickled down her cheek as she bit her trembling lip. Someone help. Please. Even after everything, the indecision that had cost her nation and its people everything, she didn't want to die. She deserved to, but she didn't want to. The snarls of beastmen and the pounding of their attacks against the door continued. A crack appeared, growing more pronounced with every thump. 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 She couldn't die like this. At the least, she would die with what little dignity she had left. She was around 1/8 dragon, so it probably amounted to 1/8 of a dragon's pride. Draudilin closed her eyes, preparing the first and final spell that she would ever unleash against the beastmen. a spell she should have used the moment they stepped foot across the Draconic Kingdom's border. Herself reached out, beyond the royal palace and over her capital. She swept up the souls of her people as they were butchered in the streets and gathered them to her. She considered adding her healthy subjects, but decided against it. Even if one became livestock, there was still the possibility of them or their descendants regaining their freedom. Sacrificing their souls would no longer purchase the continued existence of others. With the souls that she drew to herself, she could at least vaporize the entire palace quarter. Hopefully, she would get someone important. She arranged her hair and fixed her diaphanous dress, straightening on her throne. Her hands turned white as she clenched its armrests and fought to steady her ragged breaths. She mustered what little defiance she could. "Bring it on, you damn fairies. I'll blast your souls straight back to the world." After a minute or so, she realized that the pounding had stopped. No sound at all issued from the other side of the door. Won't the world even let me blow myself up properly? As her tension turned into annoyance, 3 taps sounded on the door. After several moments, they sounded again. Draudilan frowned, glancing to either side of the entrance, where members of the palace guard usually stood. It was a stupid thought to have, but she had never answered a door before. The knocking came again. Her fingers drummed against the armrests of her marble throne. Why would they knock? Was it some sort of trick? Or were they mocking her with some pretense of human custom? 3 more knocks. It was becoming annoying in a different way. Draudilan rose from her throne with a sigh. Her toes curled over the cold floor as she padded around the bottles and the general mess that had accumulated with the sending away of her palace staff. She made her way to the huge double doors of the throne room, trying to figure out what was waiting on the other side. The knocks sounded again. Draudilan swallowed. Who is it? From the other side of the door came a human voice. It was rich and masculine, with a timbre reminiscent of tempered steel. "Ah, excellent, someone is in. I beg your pardon for our intrusion, madam, but we couldn't help but notice your predicament. Might you be interested in hiring security forces from the Sorceress Kingdom?" 8th day, Upper Wind Month, 1 CE, 0900 hours. A cold blast of air scattered the Katza mists, rolling over the cracked clay of the wasteland to tease the pleats of Ludmilla's skirt. Sending others to war. Difficult. An amused smile played over her lips. It was a line that one might expect of a grizzled old general watching young soldiers march off to an uncertain fate. She didn't think that sentiment applied here, however. First of all, Lord Cocytus was not a grizzled old general. He in fact insisted that he was a young man who was perfectly fit to do battle. Why he made that distinction when he was a heteromorphic being that did not age past maturation was beyond her. The difficulty lay in the fact that he wanted to go with them, but, as the Grand Marshal of the Sorceress Kingdom, he couldn't. As such, he went all the way to the very edge of the Katza Plains to look out over the windswept wilderness of the Draconic Kingdom's northern frontier. The Hanzos with him didn't detect anything within 10 kilometers, so Ludmilla supposed that he could at least have his moment. "According to Countess Corlin's plan, my lord," Ludmilla said, "it's less of a war and more of a product demonstration. If you participate, it wouldn't be much of one." Lord Cocytus' shoulders slumped. A grumbly sound rolled out from between his mandibles. Obscured by the mists roughly half a kilometer deeper in the wasteland, the gathered undead forces awaited the call to advance. Their part wouldn't come for a while yet, as they first needed to secure permission to enter the Draconic Kingdom. A spotless performance to present the Sorceress Kingdom as a respectable member of the diplomatic community was the order of the day. One of Lord Cocytus' clawed hands went up to the side of his head. After several moments passed in silence, he nodded to himself. "The Prime Minister," he informed her. "Permission to begin has been granted." "Psycho," Ludmilla said. "We are ready to depart, my lady." Her adjutant came forward with 7 other elder liches. Each was the sergeant of one of the Death Series squads waiting at the border, but they would accompany her to the Draconic Kingdom's capital. She turned to Lord Cocytus. "Did you have any parting words for us, Grand Marshal?" He scratched his head, considering. The mission. Too much, perhaps, but show them the power of the Sorceress Kingdom. He was probably right about that. Impressing the might of the Sorceress Kingdom on the Draconic Kingdom would probably lead to lasting mental trauma amongst its citizens. Still, She had some security forces to showcase. "I'll try not to scare them too much," she smirked. "If anyone in the general staff notices something about the strategic situation, please have them let me know." Ludmilla activated her hairpin and rose from the ground. After offering a parting salute to the Grand Marshal, she rose into the sky with Psycho beside her. The Elder Lich sergeants formed a wing to either side of them. From the gloom, the half-dozen shadow demons she would use for reconnaissance followed in a formation of their own. Once they ascended to roughly 3,000 meters, they started their journey south. Her time with Elishnish had taught her many principles when it came to flight that she would have never imagined as a terrestrial denizen. The first was that it was remarkably easy to get around undetected in the sky. Distance was a component of concealment and detection, so one could simply fly to a certain height and never be noticed by the vast majority of observers on the ground. This was baked into the local common sense: the further one was away, the harder they were to spot. Several tests with Elishnish, however, proved that the truth was far more arbitrary. The Frost Dragon could comfortably read a book from 10 kilometers away, but concealment skills made it so that her ability to detect those targets was reduced drastically. Even without her equipment, Ludmilla could get within about 500 meters from her companion in the open before she was detected. With her equipment, she could close to within 50. Employing all of these factors made a high-altitude approach effectively undetectable from the ground. To be extra sure, their flight path first brought them over the inland sea before following the coastline from several kilometers away. They leveled out at around 5,000 meters and Ludmilla started to compare the view of the Draconic Kingdom to the map provided by Chief Venomscale, which she had committed to memory. A vast wilderness made up the northern edge of the country, stretching all along the northeastern border. The area bordering the Katsa Plains was known to merchants as the Dead March. Instead of developing their northwestern frontier, the Draconic Kingdom opted to use it as a buffer zone where threats were identified, intercepted and destroyed. To the east of the Dead March was a vast stretch of mountainous terrain. To the north of it was Wyvern Rider territory. At a certain point in the southeast was the beginning of the Beastman Kingdom. Unlike the area 200 kilometers to the north where the 6th Legion had conducted their late winter campaign, the mountains here were covered in thick vegetation. Rivers flowed out from the region's deep, long valleys on their way to the coastal plain before reaching the sea. It took roughly 2 hours for their flight to cross over into the actively managed lands of the Draconic Kingdom. From high above, she wouldn't have been able to tell that the nation was at war. There were no signs of devastation across the low-lying coastal plain and the fields had even been sown. The first major settlement they passed by was a small harbor city that went by the name of Blindhold on the trade maps. It was there that she saw the first signs of the ongoing struggle. Dropping to 2,000 meters. "Is something the matter, my lady?" Psycho asked. "The city below is under siege," Ludmilla replied. "At least I think it's under siege." Sets of huts were raised in a ring about a kilometer distant from the Blighthold's walls, mostly centered around the copses near the city. The view below had all the makings of the siege, except that there were no visible attempts at taking the fortifications. Packs of beastmen moved below, patrolling their side of the perimeter. One group of beastmen drifted closer to the walls. A volley of arrows landed a dozen meters short of them. Laughter rolled out from the beastman group. "What do you see?" Psycho asked. "How much did you notice down there?" Ludmilla asked back. "Little," the Elder Lich replied. "We are too high to make out what's going on." The conditions were clear and the sun was almost directly overhead, so it appeared that even the strongest Elder Liches in the Royal Army had vision comparable to a regular human. Barring their dark vision, of course. The Death Seer's servitors were the same, so it served as another compelling reason to get her rangers trained and working with the Royal Army as soon as possible. "The city is being contained," Ludmilla said. "It might explain why we're not getting any merchant traffic. All the ships in the harbor are sunk at their moorings and it looks like beastman patrols are moving along the roads. I wouldn't be surprised if the frontier is littered with pickets to prevent anyone from leaving." "How many beastmen are present?" "Going by what I've seen so far, this siege has dwellings for perhaps 1,000 beastmen." It was less a siege camp and more a set of small villages encircling the city. By what little she had seen and heard so far, Ludmilla already had a fair idea of what was going on. A human army was normally accompanied by a supply train that was often dozens of kilometers long. The army could also procure supplies from local sources by foraging, hunting, purchasing them from merchants or pillaging them from their enemies. Acting poorly against the local population was usually a bad idea, especially if the army planned on annexing and occupying that territory after the war. Beastmen, however, had no need to make any such considerations. They could forego supply trains and simply eat as they went along. Judging by how they had made themselves comfortable around the town and the rural regions around it, the Beastman army had broken up into tribal groups and had dispersed across the Draconic Kingdom. If what she saw was representative of their numbers across the country, there were upwards of 250,000 occupying the land. There was no pressing need for a decisive victory. They were too powerful and numerous for the Draconic Kingdom to dislodge, and there was plenty of food, millions of humans, around to sustain them. The free territories of the Draconic Kingdom were slowly being eaten into submission. This meant that, while tens of thousands of citizens were being consumed every day, the country itself was in no immediate danger of vanishing in its entirety. "Report our findings to Lord Cocytus and his general staff," Ludmilla said. "It looks like we'll be going with Plan B for the Katsa force. Hopefully, these beastmen react as expected." Ludmilla and her entourage ascended and continued their southeastern flight. While she already had some notion of what the beastmen were trying to do before entering the Draconic Kingdom, seeing it in person was surreal. Unlike what one might imagine of a demi-human invasion, the beastmen were fairly methodical. The human settlements were depopulated to a point, after which they were mostly left alone. Occasionally, they would fly over a village being attacked by a pack of beastmen, who would drag one or two people off to wherever the nearby tribe was. Of course, beastmen did not simply eat once and never eat again. Depending on the race, carnivorous demi-humans might feed anywhere from every day to once every few weeks. A quick calculation using the numbers she saw below had her estimate that it was somewhere under 2 weeks for the ones occupying the land. This made the scenery below seem surprisingly normal. At least if one was on the ground. From above, she could see where the beastman tribes had situated themselves and how many human settlements were in their hunting range. As for the Draconic Kingdom's citizens, most people wanted to live even if life was terrible. To live, one needed to eat, and so they continued their seasonal activities. Work continued in the fields and the occasional wagon could be seen delivering goods to the towns and the cities. In all, it was a different sort of order, one presided over by beastmen. "There is one thing I do not understand, my lady," Psycho said. "While the human citizens here are physically interdicted, that does not stop them from using magic. Message is a second-tier spell and casters of that caliber are not phenomenally rare. We have not been challenged in the air, so fly also appears to be an option where available. If this conflict has been ongoing for over a year, there has been ample time to call for and receive assistance from their allies." "That is the question that everyone would like to know the answer to," Ludmilla replied. "There is a certain taboo about using message spells for important and sensitive communications, but I think that anyone would resort to it in this situation. It could be that the same taboo is causing the recipients to disregard the unsolicited message spell. Alternatively, it could mean that the invading army has developed a way to stop message spells. Our spell research department would be very interested in the latter if it is the case." "I think we all would," Ludmilla snorted. "Instantaneous communication at any distance is a pesky problem to deal with on many levels." It was close to 3 hours past midnight by the time they covered the 400-kilometer distance between the Katsa Plains and the capital of the Draconic Kingdom. The fortified city was roughly the size of our winter, situated on a large river some 30 kilometers from the coast. A thick curtain wall roughly 10 meters high encircled the city, while a second wall ringed a large palace set on a stony hill overlooking the river. A chorus of cries from the streets below sent a wave of alarm through her. "The city's defenses have been breached," Ludmilla said. "Let Lord Cocytus know that we're about to arrive." She went into a free fall, descending to 2 kilometers before reactivating her hairpin and guiding herself towards one of the palace towers. On the way down, she noted dozens of beastmen streaming in from outside. "Shadow demons, 2 of you remain with me. The rest of you, locate Queen Auriculus." Ludmilla called her glaive to hand as her boots hit the stone of the parapet. She stood still upon landing, alert for any indication that she had been detected. After several moments, she went over and peeked down the stairwell. Bestial roars and the cries of human defenders punctuated the sounds of battle drifting up the tower. Whoever was guarding the post had probably left to join the fight. She listened for a few more moments before heading back up. "Should we contact Lord Cocytus?" Psycho asked as he floated down in front of her. "This spot is too open," Ludmilla replied. "We'll do it inside. Summon wraiths and use them to help figure out where the queen is. She should be in some sort of fortified section, or maybe she's barricaded herself in the throne room." That was assuming she was in the city at all. She knew very little of Queen Auriculus. Captain Cavallaro spoke well of her, but Ludmilla felt that he was speaking of her as a prospective romantic interest rather than making a judgment of her character. It could be that the black-scaled dragon lord had fled the city and they would have to go to another castle. Ludmilla descended to the floor below and nodded at Psycho. Several moments later, the portal of a gate opened before them. Through it came one whose appearance gave her pause. Is this why Elishnish decided to continue attending that dojo? Before her stood a man in a black suit. He was a few centimeters taller than Ludmilla, with broad shoulders and a powerful physique. In combination with his sharp eyes and meticulously groomed beard, she suspected many women of all ages would find him attractive. With his pure white hair and venerable features, Ludmilla would call him aged, but for the second visage that she understood to be his true appearance. Like many of the Sorcerer King's servants, the man was not a human. Along with his human guise, Ludmilla's gaze traced over a head that could only be described as draconic. Steel grey scales glistened in the torchlight over a head that swept back into a pair of ridged frills. Stubby horns protruded from behind his dim silver eyes and out from the hinges of his jaw. She couldn't tell what the rest of him looked like, as he was covered in his suit and wore pristine white gloves. Overall, it gave the strange appearance of a man in a finely tailored suit with a dragon-like head sticking out of the collar. He was the Sorcerer King's butler, Sebastian. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Lord Tian." Ludmilla lowered her head into a curtsy. "I'm Baroness Ludmilla Zaradnik, currently serving as the military commander of the relief effort dispatched to the Draconic Kingdom." "Likewise, finally getting to meet you is a pleasure, Baroness Zaradnik." Lord Tian returned her greeting with a bow. "I've heard much about you from my colleagues and a few of our mutual acquaintances. I look forward to working with you." A shadow demon appeared out of the darkness in the corner of the room. It drifted to Ludmilla's side, offering a respectful bow to Lord Tian. "Report," Ludmilla said. "We've located an individual that may be Queen Auriculus," the shadow demon said. "She is seated on a stone throne in a large hall. The door seems magically locked." "Where are the beastmen forces?" "They are scattered throughout the palace, searching and looting. The human defenders offer resistance, but can reclaim no ground." "Good work," Ludmilla nodded. "Show us the way." With a flap of its dark wings, the shadow demon turned and flew down the stairs. Lord Tian offered her an appraising look. "Perhaps it should be expected considering you are Lady Shiltia's vassal," he said, "but you appear well adjusted for a human." He didn't know she was undead? There must have been some reason for that. "His Majesty's reign has brought peace and prosperity to our lands, my lord," Ludmilla replied. The trepidation displayed in the past over Rantle's new circumstances was understandable, but one can only spurn His Majesty's benevolence for so long before being considered an ingrate. They made their way down to the next floor. The shadow demon was waiting by a half-opened door. "What's in the corridor?" Ludmilla asked. "Nothing," the shadow demon answered. "But the beastmen run this way and that. They may be encountered at any point." "Can you conceal your presence, Lord Tian?" "Of course." "Then let's minimize the number of confrontations from here to our objective. We need to reach Queen Auriculus, if it's even her, before the beastmen do. Psycho, stay here with the others and continue collecting information. I'll let you know when to move on to the next phase." The shadow demon melded into the wall, the slits of its amber eyes leading them through the palace corridors. It wasn't long until they encountered the first of many corpses. Palace guards, household servants, even children littered the hallways in various states of dismemberment. Bloody tracks led in every direction, adding to a sense that the beastmen were reveling in the slaughter. She stopped at a pool of blood, eyeing the prints of footpads leading from it. "Can you leave trackless steps, my lord?" she asked. "Unfortunately not, my lady," he answered. "I am a monk. I will mind my steps as we make our way." Since many of the beastmen were leaving tracks as well, it appeared that many of them did not have any job classes related to rangers, or at least weren't experienced enough to leave trackless steps yet. There was also a chance that they never developed the ability. That didn't mean there weren't any at all, however. The clash of battle grew nearer as the shadow demon led them forward. It stopped before they reached a large, well-lit hallway. The hallway to the left goes forward 100 meters before reaching another, the shadow demon said. 50 meters from there is the entrance to the hall with the throne. Ludmilla poked her head around the corner. On both sides of the hallway, over 100 beastmen were fighting the palace's defenders, who had holed themselves up in the rooms along the way. Spears and sword points jabbed out of the doorways as they attempted to keep the invaders from breaking in. She stepped back and turned to address the shadow demon. "Enter the throne room and ensure that our target remains secure," Ludmilla told it. "Do not show yourself unless necessary." After it vanished into the wall, Ludmilla joined Lord Tian, who was standing out in the hallway watching the desperate battle. "Shall we intervene on the defenders' behalf?" Lord Tian asked. "The queen will need her palace staff for later." Ludmilla gripped her glaive. "Let's be quick about it, my lord. Fighting for too long may attract more and delay us further." Then, without further ado, Lord Tian tightened his gloves. The hallway exploded into a maelstrom of gore. The Sorcerer King's royal butler appeared on the far end before the shower of blood rained on the floor. It took several moments for the weapons jabbing out of the doorways to stop poking at their now non-existent foes. Ludmilla looked down at her glaive before shaking her head. "It's a good thing Lord Cocytus didn't come. He might have cut the palace in half." She dropped her now unnecessary concealment and made her way through the mess. The ceilings dripped crimson and bits of beastman stuck to where they had splattered into the walls. Fearful faces were framed by each doorway and the defenders only dared to look outside after she walked by. Their expressions were uncomprehending as they blinked at the aftermath of Lord Tian's passage. A royal household was supposed to contain the best that a kingdom's nobility had to offer, but, compared to the man standing calmly at the end of the hall, Queen Auricula's servants may as well have been fifth-rate tavern staff. "Maybe I should send my footman to that dojo." At the end of the hall, Lord Tian was quietly watching a dozen or so beastmen rend a huge set of oak doors. With how much focus and effort they were putting into it, the material of the barrier was probably enchanted. While they did have the heads of different predatory animals, Ludmilla couldn't determine the hierarchy between them. "I wonder if there's an officer in that bunch," she muttered. "I'm afraid their attire is unfamiliar to me," Lord Tian said. "We could always ask." "Hey." A beastman with the head of a lion finally noticed them standing there. "Who the hell are you?" At his call, the group at the door stopped and ran towards them. Each was anywhere between 2 and 3 meters in height, their claws and maws stained with blood. "We have business with the lady inside," Lord Tian said. "Might you be so kind as to cease your activities?" "Cease?" The beastman who first spoke stopped in front of them. "Food has no right to make such demands. Don't you see we—" The beastman wrinkled his nose and turned his head. One by one, the others turned to look down the hall that Lord Tian had come down. A smile crept onto Ludmilla's face as they looked back in unison with drooping whiskers. After the beastmen joined the mess in the hallway, Ludmilla offered the royal butler a trooper's towel. She attempted to gauge Lord Tian's strength, but her conclusion only came out as ridiculous. He was comparable to the Sorcerer King's most powerful courtiers. "Lord Tian," she asked, "are you wearing a ring of non-detection or under a similar effect?" "I am not, my lady," Lord Tian replied. "Why do you ask?" "I was just thinking that they really are like cats." She glanced over the grisly scene again. Master Tian used the magic item and handed it back to her. He straightened the lapels of his coat. "You weren't aware of the forms of these beastmen before this?" "I did know, my lord," Ludmilla replied. "I was referring to their behavior. Cats are predators with a singular focus. They are very easy to distract and confuse. I wanted to avoid making any ignorant assumptions about other races, but I can't help but think that they share in that behavior. They were focused on breaking down the door and didn't notice that the fighting in the hall had stopped. Then they came to confront you and didn't notice the mess in the hall. Any experienced combatant would attempt to assess potential opponents before confronting them, but they didn't." Smith Kovalev's assessment was more telling than she realized. Feared beastman behavior could be a strength or a weakness depending on the circumstances, and it was likely exploitable in personal combat as it was inexorably tied to one's instinct and reflexes. How the beastmen behaved when dealing with things indirectly or on a wider scale, however, was yet to be seen. No new beastmen appeared, so they made their way over to the throne room door. As it was magical, the splintered hole indicated that it was entirely broken. Or maybe it was the door with the hole in it? She wasn't sure how it worked in this case. "Are you ready, Lord Tian?" Ludmilla asked. Now that we're here, the lines that were handed to me seem a bit embarrassing." "They gave you lines?" Ludmilla thanked the gods that Lord Tian had come at the last moment. Marketing presentations just weren't her thing. "Perhaps they aren't as bad as they seem," Lord Tian said. "Countess Wagner noted my poor advertising skills some time ago, so I can only defer to her judgment." Great. Two people who had no business doing business had been entrusted with opening a dialogue with the Draconic Kingdom. Maybe they would identify a combat merchant job class someday. Lord Tian raised a gloved hand and knocked on the intact door. Ludmilla straightened in place and smoothed out her skirts. After a few seconds' thought, she closed her forest green mantle around herself. She didn't want to influence the negotiations negatively with what some might consider a brazen appearance. Several more seconds passed in silence. Lord Tian knocked on the door again. Nothing happened. Ludmilla frowned. There was no sound on the other side, only the faintest trace of alcohol wafting out of the hole to mix with the scent of carnage in the hallway. "Is our target still in there?" The shadow demon in the throne room poked its head out from under the door and nodded. Ludmilla exchanged a look with Lord Tian before he knocked on the door once more. Ludmilla heard bare feet padding over the floor. Who is it?" From the other side of the door came a woman's voice. It was small and tentative, almost seeming as that of a child's. "Ah, excellent, someone is in. I beg your pardon for our intrusion, madam, but we couldn't help but notice your predicament. Might you be interested in hiring security forces from the Sorceress Kingdom?" Draudilin dug out her ears. Was she hearing things? The Sorceress Kingdom? "Yes, madam." The man's rich voice seemed to suffuse her belly with warmth. "My name is Sebastian, a humble servant of the Sorcerer King." Who in the world was the Sorcerer King? What was the Sorceress Kingdom? She forced aside her frayed emotions and made her exhausted mind work, but she couldn't recall anything of the sort nearby. Were they from one of the nations deeper in the continent? The presence of the Beastman Kingdom made diplomacy with nations further east next to impossible, so she couldn't figure out how or why they would have come if they were. No, that's not what I should be worrying about right now. The Beastmen, what happened to them? We asked them to stop. And then? Unfortunately, they would not. You have our apologies for the mess. They killed them? To make it into the palace being overrun by Beastmen, how many soldiers did they bring? He said something about hiring security forces. Was it some sort of powerful mercenary group? Certain nations in the world beyond made war their primary industry, specializing in creating armies that other countries could hire. Could it be that they had come, seeing an opportunity in the Draconic Kingdom? Draudilin swallowed, daring to hope. You said something about security forces. How many soldiers did you bring with you? At the moment, I have come before you with one other. It would be a breach of protocol to bring an army into a sovereign state without their approval first. But how did the Beastmen, what spell did you cast to get rid of them? Even if he was an adamantite warrior, there would be a great deal of noise made fighting so many Beastmen in the palace. It stood to reason that this Sebastian was a powerful magic caster. One that perhaps used spells that influenced the mind or inflicted death effects to silently kill his adversary. Well, if one must frame it in those terms, I cast Fist. She had never heard of that spell before. So a foreign representative has come to offer an army. What am I waiting for? Just a moment, Draudilin called through the door. Just to be sure, you are not a Beastman, yes? Most assuredly not, madam. Considering that he had removed the Beastmen that were already breaking down the door, it wasn't as if keeping the door closed would keep him out if he wanted to get in. She went over to the side and released the magical lock on the throne room entrance. As the door slowly swung open, Draudilin's mouth fell open. She slammed the door shut again, her heart hammering in her chest. What was that? He was gorgeous. Stunning. Amazing. The vocabulary of an overexcited teenager swam in her head as she fought to regain her composure. The man's rich voice floated through the hole in the door again. Her stomach did a little flip. Is something the matter, Madam? Just a minute. She turned her back to the door. The broom, where's the broom? Her throne room was a mess. Bottles, broken glass, scraps of trash and boxes of supplies were scattered over the floor. Though there was a hole in the window, the place still smelled. Draudillan sniffed herself. She was a mess. When was the last time she had washed? Yesterday? No, the day before? Everything seemed so pointless with her world crumbling around her. The palace's cleaning supplies were of course not in the throne room. Neither was a change of clothes. They were quite far away, in fact. Getting them will involve opening the door, which would result in her destruction. A crisis have come upon Draudillan Auriculus, and, once again, she was caught powerless and unprepared. World teleportation, I should have asked my great-grandfather to show me that. It was magic that came in handy for occasions just like this, but it was too late. Madame. Draudillan froze. She looked over her shoulder to find that the broken door had drifted open. Sebastian's steely grey gaze went from her to her throne room. Ah, I want to die. Never mind the dignity of the Draconic Kingdom, she was a failure as a woman. She fiddled with the thousands of souls she had collected from the city. Maybe she should just burn everything and herself along with it. Someone cleared their throat beside her. Draudillan turned to find that the door had been closed. A tall woman remained inside with her, proffering a fluffy white towel. A magic item that casts the clean spell, the woman explained in a mellow voice. Our time is limited, so please feel free to use it. Draudillan received the item, then she felt a comb gently running through her hair. She started tearing up. There were good people in the world, after all. She wiped her eyes and used the item. Feeling a bit refreshed, she walked over to her throne, trying her best to ignore the clutter on the floor. She picked up the crown lying beside the throne, a golden diadem with the sweeping horns and frills of a metallic dragon. After checking it for dust and debris, she plopped it on her head. Then she plopped herself on her throne. The nice woman who had attended to her looked up to the throne with a question on her face. Draudillan nodded, and the woman went to open the door. Crisp steps sounded as Sebastian came forward to stand before her. Ah, I want to touch his beard. Your Majesty, Sebastian said with a bow, forgive us for our unsolicited intrusion. Once again, I am Sebastian, a representative of the Sorceress Kingdom. Draudillan nodded. You are forgiven, and you have our most heartfelt thanks for your assistance. We are Draudillan Auriculus, the Black-Scaled Dragon Lord and Queen of the Draconic Kingdom. I believe you have come to us with a proposal? She fought to keep a light and childish tone from creeping into her voice. Damn it. It's become a habit. Would he actually prefer that? All of her vassals and subjects did. Except she was currently her adult self, so it would probably sound rather strange. Yes, Your Majesty, he rose from his bow. The Sorceress Kingdom has recently established itself in the region, and I have come as part of the delegation to open diplomatic and economic relations with your country. We have been busy settling our internal affairs until recently, so you have our apologies for sending an envoy so late after our appearance in the region. Draudillan resisted the urge to swallow. His demeanor, while respectful, also spoke of one who was in control. The words were that of someone looking in from the outside, someone who had gauged the situation and determined that something could be gained from it. In a sense, it was a relief. Those that came freely offering gifts were the most suspect. We thank you for coming nonetheless, Draudillan offered him a regal nod. But why would the Sorceress Kingdom come at this late hour? It pains us to say so, but we have little to offer anyone with things as they are. His Majesty the Sorcerer King, Ainzul Gaun, is a sovereign of supreme means. But not all things are born of power, wealth or renown. What the Sorcerer King desires is friendship. Friendship? She clamped her mouth shut. Her outburst was a mistake, but, at the same time, it was not something that a head of state would randomly risk war to obtain. If friends were what the Sorcerer King desired, however, she would happily become his friend to save her people. They could even be like the royals in the legend of the 13 heroes and embark on grand adventures. Indeed, Your Majesty, Sebastian replied. Friendship between our two nations. We believe that establishing mutually beneficial relations with our new neighbors is for the best. Oh, that sort of friendship. It was silly to think that help could be purchased so cheaply. That much was common sense, and it was especially important for new countries. States isolated from diplomacy and trade inevitably lost ground against their neighbors. The Draconic Kingdom's situation was a painful reminder of this. While there were exceptions, very few nations had the resources to simply ignore or overwhelm whatever came their way. We are unfamiliar with this sorcerous kingdom you hail from. You say that we are neighbors. Might we ask where it is? Its capital region is the Duchy of Erantal, on the opposite side of the Katsa Plains. Erantal? The last she heard, Erantal was a territory of the Kingdom of Riestais. Her prime minister had mentioned something about a ridiculous declaration from a magic caster over a year previous. Was it not so ridiculous after all? But why would Baharuth or Riestais permit the founding of a new state in such a strategically critical location? Furthermore, magic casters were limited in their destructive capacity. They could only do as much as they had mana for, and mana regeneration was slow. The Duchy of Erantal was a highly desirable territory despite its proximity to the Katsa Plains. It was the only land corridor that existed between the kingdoms of the north and the lands to the south on this side of the Great Barrier Range that stretched halfway across the continent. Any power that carved out that relatively small territory as a sovereign state would need to keep its military at home or risk a swift occupation by its neighbors. As much as she would have liked to believe that they could back up their claim, it was too unrealistic. Sebastian was certainly powerful, but even parties of adamantite adventurers could only delay the Beastman Kingdom in one place at any one time. Perhaps he was playing with her heart in order to swindle what little she had left before abandoning her to her fate. "We are not opposed to this," she said, "but please understand that your claims are difficult for us to believe. The forces of the Beastman Kingdom run rampant over our lands, and even powerful adventurers cannot contain them. Furthermore, this invasion is orders of magnitude greater than that which the Draconic Kingdom has faced in the past." "Your Majesty's position is not unreasonable," Sebastian replied. "May we have permission to enter your country with our forces?" He didn't even pause at her doubts. She analyzed his every action and word, trying to discern any duplicity or malice. After finding nothing, Draudillan nodded. "Very well," she said. "You have our permission." Sebastian turned to face the woman who had come with him. "Provide a suitable demonstration for Her Majesty," he told her. The woman dipped into a curtsy before slipping out of the throne room without a word. "That one is a noble." Her movements, looks, the telltale mask. The way she seamlessly moved to help prepare her for her audience. Going by that, she was the one who should have been attending to her while Sebastian went to provide a suitable demonstration. "You are not going with her?" Draudillan asked. "No, Your Majesty," Sebastian smiled slightly behind his neatly groomed beard. "I am here to attend to you and keep you safe. Please let me know if there is anything that you desire." Draudillan licked her lips and swallowed as he came to stand beside her throne, her heart hammering wildly in her breast. "Psycho, we're clear to begin the next phase. Secure that tower and get set up." Ludmilla returned the way from which they had come, walking back up the hallway painted in Beastman. While the mess was still there, the human defenders were no longer in their rooms. Dozens of crimson footprints led in the opposite direction. She followed them through the palace until shouts and roars echoing from further on quickened her pace. She found the palace guard, or at least she thought they were the palace guard, at the top of a wide spiral staircase. Upon closer inspection, they were a hodgepodge of men and women, and only a few appeared to carry themselves as warriors did. The rest clutched a variety of polearms, presenting a bristling barrier against several beastmen who were trying to make their way up. Whenever the demi-humans looked like they were about to break through, several men with greatswords stepped through the makeshift spear wall and slashed down at them. Ludmilla nodded to herself. Whoever was organizing the defense knew what they were doing. This was especially the case when she considered what she had observed of the beastmen in front of the throne room. Steps sounded from behind her, followed by a gasp. She turned to see a young woman carrying a small crate in her hands. "Why you're the one that..." Ludmilla frowned at the woman's stammering, which only seemed to turn the woman pale. "Ah, they must think I was the one responsible for the hallway. Lena, where the hell are those potions?" A roar sounded from the stairs. "You better get the hell of wait, you're the one that, what are you doing here? Is the queen safe?" The man who spoke was a warrior adorned in plate armor that had seen better days. He lowered his greatsword and lifted his visor, revealing a pair of brown eyes under bushy grey eyebrows. "Her Majesty is secure," Ludmilla replied. "Are you an officer?" "Captain Scarvo of the Royal Guard." He touched the tips of his gauntleted fingers over the opposite shoulder. "I have a few questions for you, Captain Scarvo," Ludmilla said. "But first." She drew a longbow from her infinite haversack, knocking a broadhead arrow to its string. After hopping onto the railing overlooking the stairs, she loosed an arrow into the neck of a tiger beastman. She loosed another as it tumbled down the stairs, finding the jester the next. The remaining beastmen retreated and she frowned. What's going on here? For demi-human warriors, they were far weaker than anticipated. Their equipment was notably lacking, as well. With the immediate threat removed, the men and women of the spear wall collapsed on the floor in relief. Ludmilla hopped off of the railing and put her bow away. The woman with the crate set it down on the floor nearby, opening the lid to reveal a dozen carefully packed potions. She distributed them to the defenders, who each offered their thanks before quaffing the concoctions. After checking his men, Captain Scarvo nodded in Ludmilla's direction. "Thank you, Miss Zaradnik," she replied. "Baroness Ludmilla Zaradnik, of the Sorceress Kingdom." The captain furrowed his brow. "A noble?" he murmured, then shook his head. "Thank you, my lady. Your assistance was most timely." "Is there something wrong with being a noble?" Ludmilla asked. "Ah, no, my lady," the captain bobbed his head several times. "Just unexpected. Nobles don't run around alone here. They might lead troops from the back, but they usually don't participate in the fighting." "Then you aren't one, I take it." "Me?" Captain Scarvo snorted in amusement. "Scarvo's just an old captain in the palace guard. I'm not cut out to do noble things." "Lady Zaradnik, our forces are arriving now. Will you be coming to the war room?" She raised a hand to her ear. Captain Scarvo gave her a puzzled look. "I found a local officer, so I'm trying to get some information out of him. Keep the squads there for now. Use wraiths to clear the palace of beastmen. Will wraiths be sufficient?" "It sounds strange, but I think so. Let me know if they meet any real resistance." Ludmilla lowered her hand. "Apologies for the interruption, Captain," she said. "My adjutant contacted me." She frowned at his uncomprehending look. Were they not familiar with magical communication? As a captain, he should at least be able to cast his voice. Ludmilla cleared her throat. "First of all, is there a map of this city available?" "We have maps, my lady, but Her Majesty has requested that I provide her with proof that my forces can fight the beastmen. You may ask her if you wish, but the people of the city are dying by the second." That probably wasn't a fair thing to say considering that they themselves had been trying to time their entrance for maximum effect. The captain fell silent for a moment before speaking again. "We can't ask her." "I beg your pardon?" "Her Majesty, she sent us away. Told us to leave her and save ourselves. Told us she didn't want to see our faces again." "You're still here?" "We are." Captain Scarvo's expression firmed. "She told us to go away, so we did. We just didn't go very far. But we can't see her again unless she rescinds her command." Ludmilla covered her smile with a gauntleted hand. It seemed stupid, but she would have probably done the same were she in their position. The captain glowered at her reaction. "It's a good thing that you didn't run, Captain," she told him. "The beastmen have cut off the Draconic Kingdom from the rest of the world. They've sunk the ships in the harbors and have blocked off the northern border. Your loyalty to your queen has saved you, and if you did not stay, we would probably not have made it in time." Captain Scarvo's glower transformed into a flustered look. "That's, I'll have one of the footmen get you a map. Do you really mean to save the city?" "I feel that it is sufficient proof of our capabilities," Ludmilla replied. "On that note, I have some questions about these invaders." "What would you like to know?" She gestured to the clearly not warriors who had formed the spear wall at the top of the stairs. "These people fighting under your command, who are they?" "Palace staff, mostly. Got a few of my men in the mix, but the rest belong to the royal household. Maids and such." "You were using them to great effect," Ludmilla noted. "If regular household servants can manage that, how did the beastman get this far?" "It doesn't work in the long run," Captain Scarvo replied. "Eventually, one comes along that can break through and that's it for us." "How often do one of those appear?" It's the Lord types, usually. Some might also be their warriors. Do you mean to say that the ones you've been fighting aren't their warriors?
Yes,
my lady.
Well, there were probably a few in the mix, but nothing crazy. Probably a tribe looking to make a name for itself. She narrowed her eyes at his answers.
So this Beastman army is made up of different tribes?
That's right. If that's the case, how does their command structure work?
We're not sure exactly how it works, my lady,
Captain Scarvo said, but the tribes are all part of one clan or the other and the clans run the show.
Do they have a general or some war council that leads them?
They do, the captain nodded. We had Crystal Tear, the adamantite adventurer party here, go and kill them. Figured we could stop the invasion like that. What happened?
We killed them. Then the Beastmen sent a group to kill Crystal Tearite while they were celebrating their win in the throne room here. After that, the countryside was overrun.
Where did those Beastmen go?
Are they in the city? If there was a group of Beastmen capable of besting an adamantite adventurer team, they would probably also be capable of destroying a Death Series servitor.
We don't know, Captain Scarvo shook his head. Probably not.
Attacks like this are usually just a bunch of tribes hungry for food or glory.
We've been trying to starve them out,
so probably the former.
The footman Captain Scarvo sent out returned with a rolled-up map. He handed it over to Ludmilla. Thank you, she said.
Captain Scarvo, would you like to advise my general staff while we take back the city?
Someone with local expertise would be of great help.
I'm sorry, my lady, the captain said.
We'd love to help you, but we can't abandon our posts.
Ludmilla nodded before going on her way. The palace would probably be clear of beastmen shortly and she doubted anything could threaten Queen Auriculus with Sebastian guarding her. Still, she could only respect his resolve and had no right to undermine it. She returned to the tower where they had arrived, which had by that point been converted into a command center. Death Series servitors filled the ground floor and the second floor had been converted into a war room. Tables and other pieces of furniture had been carried in by the forces that arrived via gate. Ludmilla placed the map of the city on the table. Olga and Raoul, who had come with the Lionum sisters, reached out to unfurl it before them.
How's the palace looking? Ludmilla asked. The third and second floors have been cleared, my lady, Leluvian replied. We're scouring the main floor and the basement levels now.
Any notable resistance?
An individual was found who destroyed one of our summoned wraiths, Psycho reported. It attempted to leave the palace grounds after that, so it was eliminated. That was a shame.
Capturing and interrogating a Beastman Lord would likely yield valuable insights into their overall strategy and the rationale for the way that they conducted war.
We'll have to keep an eye out for more Lord-class Beastmen, Ludmilla said.
See if we can't find a jail or something suitable for detaining any that we capture.
Yes,
my lady. Shall we begin scouting the city?
Since we already have a map, move on to the second stage of reconnaissance.
I want to start as soon as the Elder Liches are done clearing the palace and ready to move out with their squads. Is your communication range large enough to cover the city yet, by the way?
It's about 3 kilometers to the furthest wall. It shouldn't be a problem, but we'll let you know if we experience any strain. I'm headed out, then, Ludmilla said.
Psycho, you're with me.